Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles don't come from wealth or power. They come from the love we never expected to find. Ethan Cole was the kind of man everyone in the city knew by name. People read about him in magazines and saw his face on TV whenever his company made another billion-dollar deal. He was a man who built an empire from nothing. A man who believed money could fix everything. But for all his wealth, there was one thing Ethan couldn't control: his son's broken body and the distance growing between them. His 8-year-old son. Liam had been born with cerebral palsy. Doctors said he might never walk properly. And though Ethan paid for the best hospitals, private therapists, and expensive equipment, Liam still needed help with almost everything. Ethan tried to love him, but he didn't know how. Every time he saw his son struggle to move or speak, something in him froze. Instead of holding him close, he just threw money at the problem, hoping it would make things better. That morning, Ethan decided to take Liam out for lunch. It wasn't because he wanted to spend time together. It was more because his assistant said he should make memories. So he chose a small diner outside the city, away from the fancy places he usually went. It was quiet, old-fashioned, and smelled like fresh pancakes and coffee. When Ethan walked in, wearing his expensive suit, people looked up. He didn't belong there, and everyone could see it. Liam sat in his wheelchair beside him, his small hands resting on the armrests. His eyes darted around the diner, curious but shy. Ethan was already on his phone, answering messages from his company. His fingers moved fast, his mind far away from the table. Liam tried to get his attention a few times, making soft sounds, but Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy talking about profits and contracts. Then a young woman approached their table with a bright smile. Her name tag said Grace. She had warm brown eyes and a soft, calm voice that immediately made Liam stop fidgeting. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said to him gently. "You like pancakes or burgers better?" Liam stared at her, not sure how to answer, but when she smiled wider, he made a small sound that almost sounded like pancakes. Grace laughed kindly and said, "Good choice." "Pancakes coming right up." Ethan barely looked up. "Just a coffee?" "Black," he muttered. Grace nodded but didn't move right away. She noticed the boy's small trembling hands and the way Ethan kept his phone between them like a wall. When she walked back to the counter, she couldn't help but glance over again. Something about the boy tugged at her heart. When the food came, Grace placed the plate in front of Liam carefully. She even cut the pancakes into tiny pieces so he could eat more easily. Ethan didn't notice he was typing an email. As Liam tried to lift a piece with his fork, his hand shook and the glass of orange juice tipped over. The drink spilled all over the table and dripped onto Liam's lap. His eyes widened and his lips trembled. He made a small sound, almost a cry, and tears started rolling down his cheeks. Ethan sighed loudly, frustrated. "Liam, careful. Look what you've done." His voice wasn't angry, but it was sharp enough to make the boy cry harder. People at nearby tables looked over, but before Ethan could grab some napkins, Grace appeared beside them. "It's okay," she said softly. She kneeled beside Liam's wheelchair, her eyes kind and calm. Hey, it's all right, sweetheart. Accidents happen." She pulled out a towel and gently wiped his hands and lap, speaking to him in a voice so tender that the whole diner seemed to go quiet. Liam sniffled, his breathing slowing down. Grace smiled at him again and whispered, "There we go, all better. You're such a brave boy." Liam looked at her through wet eyelashes and gave a tiny nod. Ethan watched silently. He didn't know why, but something about the way Grace spoke to his son made his chest tighten. He'd seen nurses and therapists talk to Liam before, but none of them made him feel calm like this. Grace wasn't pretending. She wasn't doing it for money or praise. She simply cared. When Grace stood up, she noticed Ethan watching her. For a second their eyes met, and she gave a small, polite smile before walking away to help another table. Ethan looked at his phone again but couldn't focus. He glanced at Liam, who was now smiling faintly as he poked at his pancakes. For the first time in months, his son looked peaceful. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind unsettled. He'd built skyscrapers, designed technology that changed lives, and earned more money than most people could imagine. Yet, here he was, feeling small, because a waitress had shown more kindness to his son in 5 minutes than he had in 8 years. When they finished eating, Ethan pulled out his wallet. He left a $100 bill on the table, more out of habit than gratitude. But when Grace came back to clear the plates, she shook her head. "Oh, that's way too much," she said with a light laugh. "Your meal was only $20. It's fine," Ethan said flatly. "Keep the change." Grace smiled, but her tone stayed gentle. "No, sir. You've already paid enough today." She placed the extra money back on the table and walked away before he could argue. Ethan froze for a second, staring at the bill. No one ever refused his money. Not ever. Outside, he loaded Liam's wheelchair into the car and helped his son buckle in. Liam looked out the window toward the diner and made a small waving motion. Ethan followed his gaze. Grace was standing by the door, waving back with a kind smile. Liam giggled softly. Ethan found himself smiling too, though he didn't understand why. On the drive home, Ethan kept thinking about her words, "You've already paid enough today." What did she mean by that? He told himself it was nothing, just a waitress trying to sound kind. But deep inside, the sentence kept echoing, like it meant something more. That night, when he put Liam to bed, the boy held on to his father's sleeve for a moment, something he hadn't done in a long time. "Grace," he whispered weakly, struggling to form the word. Ethan blinked. "You liked her, huh?" Liam gave a tiny nod, smiling before closing his eyes. Ethan stood there for a while, looking at his sleeping son. He felt something strange, a mix of warmth and guilt. Maybe the waitress was just a kind stranger. Maybe she was someone who taught him something without meaning to. But something told him this wasn't the last time they'd see her. And as he walked out of the room, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had knelt beside his son and wiped away his tears like it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time in years, the billionaire who thought he had everything realized he might have been missing something all along. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that waitress. All night her face stayed in his mind, the calm way she'd spoken to Liam, the soft smile she'd given when he refused to meet her eyes, and those words she'd said before he left. "You've already paid enough today." He didn't even know what that meant, but somehow it felt personal. Ethan Cole was not a man easily shaken. That day had left a strange mark on him. The next morning, Liam woke up unusually cheerful. He made soft humming sounds while his nurse helped him get dressed. When Ethan came into the room, Liam's small eyes lit up. He reached out a hand and made a faint sound that almost sounded like diner. Ethan frowned at first, unsure if he understood. But then Liam repeated it, pointing toward the window as if asking to go out again. "You want to go back to that place?" Ethan asked, a bit surprised. Liam nodded eagerly. Ethan wasn't used to his son showing so much excitement about anything. He thought for a moment, then gave in. "All right, let's go." They drove back to the same small diner. It was almost empty that morning, sunlight spilling through the big glass windows. The same bell above the door jingled as they entered. Ethan wasn't sure why he felt nervous, but he did. When Grace saw them walk in, her face brightened immediately. "Well, look who's back," she said warmly, crouching down to greet Liam. "You missed my pancakes, didn't you?" Liam grinned shyly, and Ethan noticed how relaxed his son seemed around her. It was rare. Liam rarely smiled like that, even at home. Grace stood up, glancing at Ethan. "Good to see you again, sir." Ethan nodded politely. "My son wanted to come," he said quickly, almost defensively, as if he needed to explain why they were there. Grace just smiled and replied, "I'm glad he did." She took their order, chatting easily with Liam, as if they were old friends. Ethan watched quietly. He wasn't used to people like her, people who didn't seem nervous or impressed by him. She treated him like an ordinary man. He wasn't sure if he liked it or not, but it was refreshing. When the food came, Grace set a plate in front of Liam and said, "I made sure they're extra fluffy today."
Oh.
Ethan couldn't help but smile. He hadn't seen his son react to anyone like this in a long time. Throughout the meal, Grace moved around the diner, refilling coffee cups, laughing with customers, and helping a group of older women at the next table. Ethan found himself watching her without realizing it. There was something about the way she moved, so natural, so full of kindness. She seemed to bring warmth into every corner of the room. When she came back to check on them, Ethan decided to ask, "You work here every day?" "Pretty much," she said, placing a fresh napkin near Liam. "Double shifts, most days. Keeps me busy. It must be hard," he said, glancing around the small diner. She shrugged lightly. "Hard isn't always bad. It means I'm still trying." Her answer surprised him. Ethan was used to people complaining about work or trying to impress him. But Grace just smiled, tired yet content. She spoke with a kind of peace he didn't understand. After finishing the meal, Liam refused to leave. He made small sounds, reaching toward Grace whenever she walked by. Ethan felt awkward, almost embarrassed by how attached his son had become so quickly. Grace noticed and knelt down beside Liam again. "Hey, sweetheart, I'll see you again soon, okay? You can come visit me anytime." Ethan expected Liam to cry, but instead he nodded slowly and gave her a soft smile. That afternoon, Ethan had an important business meeting, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the diner to Grace. There was something about her he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was how calm she was, or maybe it was how she looked at his son not with pity, but with love. Days passed, but Ethan found excuses to visit the diner again. Sometimes he'd take Liam, other times he'd go alone, pretending he just needed coffee. Grace would always greet him the same way, with a friendly smile that made the air feel lighter. One afternoon, as rain fell outside, Ethan found himself sitting by the window with Liam while Grace served other customers. She laughed with an older man about the weather, helped a young mother pick up a spilled milkshake, and still somehow found time to bring Liam extra syrup because she knew he liked it sweet. Watching her, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He'd built his whole life around power, numbers, and control. Yet here was this waitress, earning maybe $100 a day. She seemed richer in spirit than anyone he knew. As the weeks passed, Grace and Liam grew close. She taught him simple hand signs so he could express himself better. "You can say thank you like this," she told him one day, guiding his small hand into the right shape. Liam followed her example, and when Ethan saw his son silently signing thank you, his heart squeezed. It was such a small thing, but for Liam, it was progress. Ethan wanted to thank Grace, but every time he tried, the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know how to show gratitude without offering money, and something told him that she wouldn't accept it anyway. One day, as they were leaving the diner, Ethan handed her an envelope quietly. "For your kindness," he said simply. "You've been wonderful to my son." Grace looked at the envelope, then looked at him. "What is it?" "Just something to make your life easier," Ethan replied. She opened it and saw several $100 bills inside. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she closed the envelope, handed it back, and smiled faintly. "That's very kind of you," she said softly, "but you don't have to pay me for being human." Ethan froze. "It's not about payment, I know," she interrupted gently. "But some things don't need money. Some things just need heart." Ethan didn't know what to say. He took the envelope back, feeling both embarrassed and amazed. He wasn't used to people refusing his generosity. Everyone wanted something from him, except her. That night, as he drove home, rain tapping against the car windows, Liam fell asleep in the back seat with a peaceful smile. Ethan glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You really like her, don't you, buddy?" he murmured. Liam made a sleepy sound, his head resting against the seat. Ethan smiled sadly. "Yeah, me too." In the days that followed, he began visiting the diner more often, sometimes just sitting quietly with his coffee while Grace worked. She talked about simple things: sunrises, her garden, her love for helping people. She never once asked about his money or his company. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like someone was looking at him, not his fortune. Still, something about her bothered him in a strange way. Not bad, just familiar. The way she spoke, the warmth in her eyes, even the shape of her smile, it all reminded him of someone, but he couldn't remember who. Sometimes when she bent down to help Liam, he caught himself staring, trying to place where he'd seen that expression before. He couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were somehow connected, in a way he didn't yet understand. And as he drove home one evening, watching the sunset fade in the rearview mirror, Ethan realized something unsettling. He hadn't felt this alive, or this unsure, in years. Grace had walked into his life like a soft breeze, and without meaning to, she'd started changing everything. Ethan found himself thinking about Grace constantly. Her smile, her patience with Liam, and the way she seemed to understand his son in a way he never could, it all haunted him. He had tried to dismiss it at first, telling himself she was just a kind waitress. But the truth was, he couldn't stop wondering why she felt so familiar, why her presence stirred something deep inside him. The next morning, he made the decision to take Liam to the diner again. This time, it wasn't just about lunch. He wanted to see Grace, to watch how she treated his son. And maybe, just maybe, understand why she had such a calming effect. When they arrived, Liam's face lit up instantly. He pointed toward the counter, trying to make the sounds he had learned to call her by. Ethan smiled faintly. His son had grown attached in just a few visits, and Ethan realized he had to dot. Grace greeted them like old friends. "Good to see you both again," she said, kneeling beside Liam. Her voice was soft but confident, full of warmth. She adjusted his napkin and asked about his day. Ethan noticed something he hadn't before. Grace didn't just act kind. She listened. She watched every small movement of Liam, noticing when he struggled with his fork, when he wanted more syrup, when he wanted to speak. Her attention wasn't forced. It was natural as Liam enjoyed his pancakes. Ethan observed her quietly. Grace moved between tables, helping other customers. And she did it all with the same gentle smile she showed Liam. There was a balance to her that fascinated him. She could be professional, caring, patient, and still effortlessly warm. Ethan had worked with top executives and seen the most talented people in the world, yet he had never seen anyone handle life with such effortless kindness. During a quieter moment, Ethan tried to speak with her. "You've been helping Liam a lot," he said cautiously. "Does it come naturally to you?" Grace chuckled softly. "I guess so," she replied. "I've always liked helping kids. Some people are born to care for others, I suppose." Her words struck Ethan. She didn't brag, didn't ask for recognition. She simply accepted that it was part of who she was. He found himself admiring her more than he wanted to admit. It wasn't just that she was kind to Liam, it was that she treated everyone with respect and patience. He had spent years in the business world, building an empire. And yet here was a woman earning barely enough to cover her rent, who somehow seemed richer in spirit than anyone he knew. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan kept returning to the diner, sometimes with Liam, sometimes alone. He began to notice little details about Grace, how she remembered every regular customer's name, how she could tell when a child was shy or scared, how she never let anyone feel unwelcome. Each time, his respect for her grew, but beneath that admiration, a quiet curiosity began to form. There was something about her that felt familiar, something he couldn't quite place. One afternoon, while Liam napped quietly in the car, Ethan stayed at the diner, watching Grace work. She helped an elderly woman with a heavy bag, guided a mother through a tricky order, and still found time to tidy the counter. Ethan felt an odd sense of peace just watching her. He thought about his own life, his skyscrapers, his meetings, his wealth. He had everything money could buy, but he realized he had never felt this calm, this connected, this human. Grace had a power he couldn't understand, and it wasn't tied to money or status. That evening, Ethan decided to learn more about her. He didn't want to be intrusive, but he wanted to understand why she had such an effect on him and his son. He asked a few discreet questions around the diner, trying to gather small pieces of her past. He learned she had grown up in foster care, had worked multiple jobs, and dreamed of becoming a nurse. She had never married and had no children. Yet there was a maturity and wisdom in her demeanor that far exceeded her years. Ethan's interest deepened, but with it came a strange feeling, a quiet, knowing suspicion that Grace's story wasn't just ordinary. She was kind, yes, and devoted to her work. But there was something in the way she moved, in the way she smiled at Liam, that made him feel as though he had known her before. Ethan couldn't explain it. It was as if a memory, long buried, was trying to resurface. One day, he made a small gesture. He sent a donation to the diner anonymously, enough to help Grace with some of her bills. He wanted to make her life easier without drawing attention to himself. But when Grace discovered the donation, she sent it back with a note. Some things in life can't be bought. Ethan read the note multiple times, each time feeling a mix of awe and confusion. Grace was teaching him something he had never learned in business school, that money couldn't buy everything. And some of life's most important things, love, care, connection, were earned through genuine effort and heart. He realized he had been wrong to think wealth could solve all problems. Over time, Ethan and Grace began to talk more. She never asked about his wealth, never judged him for it. She spoke about ordinary things, her garden, her favorite books, the joy she found in simple moments. Ethan, who was used to people flattering him or seeking favors, found himself drawn to these conversations. He started to understand that Grace wasn't just helping Liam. She was helping him too, showing him a side of life he had forgotten. Still, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Grace. Sometimes, when she laughed or when she helped Liam with a tricky fork movement, he caught himself staring, trying to place the familiarity. She reminded him of someone from his past, though he couldn't remember exactly who. It was a subtle feeling at first, like a shadow at the edge of his mind, but it grew stronger with each visit. One rainy afternoon, Ethan stayed late at the diner while Liam slept in the car. Grace was wiping tables, humming softly to herself. Ethan watched her and realized he felt something he hadn't in years. He felt curious and hopeful. He wanted to know more about her life, about what made her who she was. He wanted to understand the pull she seemed to have on both him and Liam. Ethan knew he had to be careful. He couldn't overwhelm her with questions or try to force a connection. He had learned that over the years in business, people responded poorly to pressure. But something inside him urged him to dig deeper, to uncover the story behind the woman who had, in a matter of weeks, become so important to his son and to him as the weeks went by. Ethan became more aware of the bond growing between Liam and Grace. His son's confidence increased. He laughed more, spoke more, and even attempted small hand movements that he had struggled with before. Grace had an almost magical patience, guiding Liam with gentle words and encouraging gestures. Ethan watched, both amazed and humbled. He had never seen anyone connect with his son like this. One evening, Ethan finally asked himself a question he had been avoiding. Could Grace be more than just a kind stranger? Could there be a reason, deeper than coincidence, that she had entered their lives? The thought scared him, but it also filled him with hope. Maybe she was meant to teach him something. Maybe she was meant to change his family in ways he had never imagined. That night, Ethan sat in his office, looking at old photos he hadn't seen in years. Memories of his past, the people he had loved and lost, the mistakes he had made flashed before his eyes. Something about Grace felt tied to these memories, though he couldn't place it yet. He realized that finding her story might also lead him to rediscover parts of himself. He had long ignored. Ethan finally understood that Grace was no ordinary person. She had entered their lives for a reason, and it was up to him to understand what that reason was. She had shown him patience, compassion, and the true meaning of care. More than that, she had shown Liam love in a way he could understand. And for Ethan, who had relied on money for so long, this was a revelation. He decided to pay closer attention, to observe her carefully, and to listen to his instincts. There was a hidden story in Grace's eyes, a connection he had yet to uncover. Something told him that understanding her past could change everything for him and his son. And deep down, Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it. Grace, without even realizing it, had become the center of their lives. She had given Liam joy, confidence, and comfort. And she had given Ethan something he had long forgotten: the hope that family, love, and kindness could be found in the most unexpected places. Ethan Cole, the billionaire who thought he had everything, was beginning to learn that some of life's richest treasures couldn't be bought. And he was about to discover that Grace's story and her connection to them was far deeper and more extraordinary than he could ever imagine. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about Grace, something familiar he couldn't place. Every time he saw her with Liam, he felt a strange pull, as if he had known her somewhere before. It had been weeks now, and his curiosity had grown into an obsession. He needed to know her story. Why did she feel so connected to his family? Why did his heart respond to her kindness in ways it hadn't for years? One quiet afternoon, after the diner had closed, Ethan approached Grace as she wiped down the counters. The diner was empty, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds filling the silence. "Grace," he began, his voice unsteady, "I need to ask you something. Personal." Grace looked up, surprised but calm. "Okay," she said gently, leaning on the counter. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath. I think there's a reason you're here. Something about you feels familiar. I can't explain it, but I feel like our lives are connected in some way." Grace's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look alarmed. Instead, she folded her hands and said quietly, "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Inside were old documents, adoption records, and a few faded photographs. "I did some research," he admitted. "I found out things about your past, things that might connect you to me. I need to know the truth. I think you might be my daughter." Grace froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she processed his words. "Your daughter," she whispered. Her voice was almost a breath. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. He explained everything he had discovered. Years ago, before he became wealthy, Ethan had been in a relationship with a woman he loved deeply. She had given birth to a baby girl, but circumstances had forced her to give the child up for adoption. Ethan had never known what happened to the child afterward. He had assumed she was gone, perhaps living a life he could never reach. Grace listened quietly, her eyes filling with tears. Then she nodded slowly. "I was adopted," she admitted. "I've always known about my birth mother, but I never knew my father's identity. I had no idea it was you." Ethan felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that he had found her, fear because he had no idea how she would react. "I never meant to leave you," he said softly. "I never even knew." Grace shook her head. "It's not your fault. I've lived a good life, even without knowing. But I do know why I was drawn to Liam, to your family. When I first saw him, I felt something. Something I can't explain. That's why I came to the diner, to be near him." Ethan was stunned. "You came here because of him?" Grace nodded. "Yes, I wanted to meet him. I wanted to be part of your lives in some way, even if just from a distance at first." She paused, her voice trembling. "I didn't expect to feel this close to all of you, to feel like this is where I belong." Ethan reached across the counter, hesitating before placing a hand near hers. "You do belong here," he said softly. "I've never felt this before. You've changed everything for us, Grace, especially for Liam." I don't know how to thank you properly." Grace smiled faintly, though tears ran down her cheeks. "You don't need to thank me. I didn't do this for recognition or money. I did it because I wanted to help, and because, well, I think I always knew I would find you someday." The weight of her words hit Ethan. He realized that all these weeks, he had been searching for something money couldn't buy: connection, family. Levon Grace had brought it to him without even knowing her true place in his life. She was not just a kind stranger. She was his daughter, and somehow, in the way life worked, she had found her way to his son first. For a moment, they stood in silence, the reality settling in. Ethan could hardly believe it. The woman who had wiped his son's tears, the one who had brought warmth and joy into their lives, was his child. The realization brought tears to his eyes. He felt a mix of joy, guilt, and awe all at once. "I can't believe this," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "All this time, and I never knew. I've missed so much." Grace reached out and took his hand. "It's not too late," she said softly. "We can start now. We can be a family even if it's later than we both expected." Ethan felt a surge of hope he hadn't felt in years. He thought of Liam sleeping peacefully in the car, and realized that this discovery wasn't just about him and Grace. It was about the whole family. Liam now had a sister, someone who could love him in ways Ethan hadn't known how. and Ethan himself had the chance to rebuild a relationship with the daughter he never knew he had. Over the next few weeks, their lives began to change. Ethan invited Grace to their home, and though she was nervous at first, she quickly settled in. She helped with Liam, teaching him new ways to communicate and encouraging him in ways Ethan hadn't known existed. Her presence brought laughter, warmth, a sense of belonging that had been missing for years. Ethan watched in awe as Grace interacted with Liam. She understood his needs, instinctively, guiding him gently, encouraging him patiently. She made him laugh, cheered him on, and showed him that life could be joyful even with challenges. Ethan realized that all the money and technology in the world couldn't have done what Grace had done in a few weeks. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, Ethan turned to Grace. "You've changed our lives," he said softly. "I don't know how to ever repay you for this." Grace smiled, her eyes glistening. "You don't need to repay me. I'm part of your family now." "That's enough." Ethan felt a deep gratitude he couldn't put into words. He knew that finding Grace had brought more than just joy. It had brought healing. He had been so focused on providing materially that he had forgotten what truly mattered: love, attention, and connection. Grace had reminded him, without even trying, what family really meant. As days turned into weeks, Ethan began to learn more about Grace's past. He discovered the struggles she had faced growing up in foster care, the sacrifices she had made to become independent, and the dreams she had nurtured despite challenges. Each story she shared amazed him. She had survived hardship, worked tirelessly, and yet retained a heart full of kindness. Ethan admired her strength, her resilience, and her ability to love unconditionally. Together, they began to rebuild their family. Ethan spent more time with Liam and Grace, learning to connect in ways he had never tried before. He listened to Grace's advice about helping Liam, appreciating her insights and experience. Slowly, he became more patient, more attentive, more present. Liam responded immediately. He smiled more, laughed more, and seemed happier than ever. The bond between siblings grew quickly, even though it was new. Liam clung to Grace, trusting her completely, while Ethan watched. Grateful and amazed at the transformation, Ethan realized that Grace's arrival wasn't just a coincidence. It was fate. She had come into their lives at the perfect moment, bringing healing and love where it had been missing. She had brought them together as a family, giving them something money could never buy in those quiet evenings. As they sat together sharing stories and laughter, Ethan finally understood what had been missing all those years. Love, connection, and family couldn't be bought. They had to be nurtured, shared, and cherished. And now, with Grace in their lives, he knew they had all of that and more. Ethan looked at his daughter and son, their faces lit with joy and trust, and felt a happiness deeper than he had ever known. Grace had not only healed his son's heart, but had also begun to heal his own. And in that moment, Ethan knew that their family, finally complete, was stronger than anything money could ever build. The woman who had wiped his son's tears, the kind and gentle Waitress, had turned out to be the daughter he never knew he had. And in finding her, Ethan had found the family he had been missing all along. Their lives had changed forever, not because of wealth, power, or status, but because of love, patience, and fate. And as they embraced this new beginning, Ethan realized that sometimes the most extraordinary miracles came from the most unexpected places. Life in the Cole household began to change in ways Ethan had never imagined. Grace had become a steady presence, a guiding light not just for Liam, but for Ethan himself. The quiet warmth she brought into their lives could not be measured by money, power, or status. Slowly their home, once filled with routines and schedules, started to feel alive with laughter, connection, and hope. Ethan had always been a man of control, used to solving problems with decisions and dollars. Yet, watching Grace with Liam taught him patience. She had a way of understanding his son that no technology, no therapy, no amount of money could achieve. She encouraged Liam's small victories, climbing stairs, holding a spoon properly, even expressing himself in tiny signs, and celebrated them with gentle joy. Ethan had never thought such moments could feel so profound, yet he found himself deeply moved. Their mornings became lively. Liam would wake up with excitement, anticipating pancakes made by Grace or the playful games they shared in the kitchen. Ethan began to join them more, helping Liam with tasks he had ignored before. Grace guided him patiently, teaching him to focus on moments, not schedules. At first, Ethan struggled. He was clumsy in his attempts to connect, fumbling with Liam's needs and misjudging moments. But Grace never criticized. She encouraged, guiding him with quiet words. Slowly, Ethan began to see the change in Liam. The boy's confidence grew. His laughter rang more freely, and his small hands moved with less hesitation. Ethan also began to learn about Grace's past, the challenges she had faced while growing up in foster care, the hardships she endured to build her independence, and the dreams she had fought to pursue. Listening to her stories, he was struck by her resilience and humility. Here was a woman who had faced difficulty after difficulty, yet she had never let bitterness enter her heart. Her kindness, patience, and generosity were not learned. They were part of her nature. The realization humbled Ethan. For years, he had thought wealth and influence were the greatest forms of power. Grace showed him a new truth. True power came from compassion, courage, and love. Slowly, Ethan began to open his own heart. He spent evenings at home, sharing stories with Liam and Grace, helping with small chores, and just being present. At first, these moments felt awkward, almost foreign. He had spent so much of his life pursuing business deals that he had almost forgotten how to simply be with people he loved. Grace's quiet guidance and natural warmth helped him step into this new role, teaching him that family was not about perfection or control, it was about presence. Support and care. Liam thrived under this new environment. The boy's growth was remarkable. He laughed more often, spoke more clearly, and even started attempting words he had struggled to say before. Grace's guidance and Ethan's growing involvement created a safe, loving environment where Liam could express himself fully. Ethan marveled at the transformation, realizing that all his money and resources could never have created this change. Only love and patience could. Ethan's admiration and gratitude toward Grace deepened. He wanted to support her in every way he could, but he was careful not to overwhelm her. He offered to fund her nursing education, a dream she had long postponed due to financial difficulties. Grace accepted this time, but she insisted it wasn't a gift. It was a shared journey. Ethan understood. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking to be part of a family and to help make a better life, not just for herself, but for Liam and Ethan as well. The bond between the siblings grew naturally. Liam began to look at Grace as both a sister and a mentor. She guided him through his daily routines, encouraged him to try new activities, and celebrated his progress. Their interactions were filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and small victories that strengthened their connection. Ethan watched quietly, amazed at how effortlessly she fit into their lives. The bond he had always longed to create with Liam now had a foundation built on love and understanding. Strengthened by Grace's presence, as weeks turned into months, Ethan reflected on how much their lives had changed. He remembered the first time Grace had knelt beside Liam, wiping his tears, and he realized that simple act had set off a chain reaction that transformed their family. It was a moment he could never forget, a moment when kindness had bridged the gap between strangers, and ultimately between father, son, and daughter. Family dinners became moments of joy rather than obligation. They laughed over stories from their days, shared plans for small adventures, and celebrated even the tiniest accomplishments. Grace encouraged Ethan to see the world differently, to focus on the little victories that often went unnoticed. She showed him that being present, listening, and caring were more powerful than wealth or status. Through her, he learned the true meaning of family and connection. Ethan also began to reconsider his own life and priorities. The business empire he had built, while impressive, suddenly felt less significant compared to the bonds he was nurturing at home. He realized that his wealth could facilitate opportunities, yes, but it could not buy happiness or genuine connection. Grace's presence had opened his eyes to this truth. One evening, as they sat together watching Liam play in the yard, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He looked at Grace smiling as she helped Liam climb a small step, and then at his son, laughing freely for the first time in months. The thought struck him. He had been given a second chance, a chance to create the family he had always wanted, but had never known how to achieve. Ethan approached Grace, his voice quiet. "You've changed our lives more than I can ever say," he admitted. "I don't know how to ever thank you." Grace smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't need to thank me. I'm part of this family now." "That's enough," she replied softly. It was in that moment that Ethan truly understood. Grace's arrival had not just been a twist of fate, it had been a gift. She had brought joy, patience, love, and understanding to a family that desperately needed it. She had given Liam confidence and hope, and she had taught Ethan the value of presence and compassion. Their lives were richer not in money, but in connection, trust, and love. The days that followed were filled with ordinary yet extraordinary moments. Ethan helped Liam with homework. Grace guided him through therapy exercises, and together they shared meals, laughter, and stories. Ethan's perspective on life had shifted completely. He found joy in small victories, in quiet conversations, and in watching his children grow together. Ethan also began to share more of his life with Grace. He talked about his past mistakes, the moments he had missed with Liam, and the regrets he carried. Grace listened without judgment, offering understanding and gentle encouragement. She reminded him that the past could not be changed, but the future was theirs to shape together. Liam, now more confident and expressive, responded to this newfound environment with joy and curiosity. He explored new activities, attempted words he had struggled to pronounce, and expressed affection freely toward both his father and sister. Each day brought small milestones, each one celebrated with laughter, applause, and hugs. Ethan watched in awe, realizing that love and attention were far more transformative than any therapy or gadget money could buy. Ethan realized that Grace had not only healed his son, but had also healed him. Her kindness, patience, and love had softened the walls he had built around his heart. He began to see the world differently, appreciating moments he had once ignored, valuing connections over accomplishments, and understanding that true happiness came from family, not fortune. Months later, the family settled into a new rhythm. Evenings were spent together, mornings filled with laughter, and weekends dedicated to exploration and bonding. Grace continued her studies, and Liam flourished under their combined care. Ethan, once distant and focused solely on success, became an engaged and loving father, guided by the example of his daughter, the woman who had once been a stranger, who had wiped Liam's tears without expectation, had become the heart of their family. Grace had brought them together, teaching patience, empathy, and the meaning of true connection. Ethan finally understood that life's greatest treasures were not measured in money, but in love, presence, and family. One quiet evening, Ethan watched Liam and Grace laugh together over a board game. He felt a sense of peace he had never known. For the first time, he realized that wealth, influence, and power were nothing compared to this: the laughter, the trust, and the love shared between his children and himself. The journey had been unexpected, full of surprises and lessons. Grace had arrived as a stranger, but she became the missing piece of their lives. She had brought healing, joy, and hope, creating a family that was stronger, closer, richer than Ethan had ever imagined. Ethan smiled, realizing that the miracle had not come from money or planning. It had come from love, courage, and fate. Grace, the kind-hearted waitress who had shown compassion to his son, had revealed the most valuable truth of all: family is not just born, it is built, nurtured, and cherished. And in that realization, Ethan knew their family would never be the same again. They had found each other at the perfect moment, and together they would create a life filled with laughter, love, and connection that money could never buy. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly rich, not in wealth, but in heart, family, and happiness.